Okay. So these 15-year-olds, because this is the big question that I think a lot of people are asking is, you know, how do we reach young men, say, under the age of 25 or 22? That's the big question. You know, there's a lot of questions. How do we reach women as well? But that's a separate set. How do we prevent young men under a certain age of going off the rails the way that men older than them have? Because I went off the rails and God brought me back. That's why I'm here. It's through no great wisdom inside myself. It's purely through sanctification and God's blessing to me that I give thanks for every day. I wish I didn't have to go through that. What do we do for young men to make sure that they don't have to go through it? Like we meaning not necessarily you and me, but we as men of our generation, right? And other men listening.
Well, it's a good question. I've thought about it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure what the right answer is. I
Fair.
think, when I think about that, just like you said, and I agree as well for myself, those things had to happen for me to get to where I am right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. And I'm kind of under the belief right now that I don't think it's any different for anybody else.
Okay.
That
Mm-hmm.
you have to experience life. You have to take the risk, go out. And I think what we really have to do is allow them and teach them how to start making decisions earlier. Like put the ball in their hands, have them make certain decisions, not, nothing crazy,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it's a skill that has to be developed. They have to make a decision, because what happens when you make a decision? You make a decision, you go forward with that decision, and then you eventually find out if it was a good or a bad one.
I can relate to that.
That's how it goes. You don't know until you walk the path of that decision.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you have the experience of that was a good decision or that was a bad decision or it was, somewhere in the middle, then you have the feedback, right? You get the feedback from life that gives you more knowledge to make better decisions in the future.
Mm-hmm.
I
Okay.
think that's the process that you can't escape. You have to do that, because otherwise, hearing it from other people, reading it in books, it doesn't really have the impact that it'll have unless you yourself have experienced that. Think about like the books that are most impactful for you. You relate with it because you had some type of experience where it's almost like, when you're reading, you're like, man, he's talking about me right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's just a matter of figuring out how do we do that with a safety net, where they're not going to make these decisions that will impact like their future terribly,
Mm-hmm.
but they're making decisions nonetheless that are going to impact them right then and there. And they can start experiencing that positive or negative feedback to, be able to do these things on their own at one point.
And then I think in addition to that, also not only making right decisions, but to decide. Because I think that there's an epidemic of passivity in men where they avoid making a decision entirely. Now, not deciding is still a decision, right? One way or another, right? But they're still, when confronted with, let's just say, a couple different options, the need to, no, you have to consciously choose one. You hold their feet to the fire and say, no, choose. Don't avoid the decision. Don't let time and circumstance or other people make the decision for you, which it will, and you might not like what it chooses. You consciously choose. I think that as well.
Let's talk about that
Let's do that.
right there.
Yeah.
This is this is really one of the main things that I experience in my life, and that I try to convey in a lot of the content as well as the stuff we do through some of our coaching programs, is the passiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the problems is, this whole idea, well, I have to be a nice person,
Mm-hmm.
right? A lot of people think that way. And even all, as I grow in my faith, a lot of Christians think that way too. It's like
Yeah.
Jesus was a nice guy.
Mm.
And I I I don't think that was true.
Yeah.
When I like read about Jesus and learn about him, like he was a carpenter. He was a laborer
Mm-hmm.
essentially. Like he was a big intimidating type of guy. Like when he walked in the temple and started throwing tables over, no one even confronted that guy.
Mm.
Right? Like
Mhm.
he did what he knew what was right, and he wasn't afraid of to tell people the truth. And I think this idea that has been like infested into men for whatever reason, you have to be a nice person, you know, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Always be the bigger man, happy wife, happy life. All of these things are so detrimental to men
Mhm.
because when they're faced with making decisions, they don't think about their frame of mind is that going to make my wife happy? Is that going to make my parents happy? Right? Or what can I do to not upset my parents? What can I do to not upset my wife? What can I do to not upset other people in general? And when you're making decisions like that, instead of based on your morals, your values, your purpose and direction in life, you're just kind of floating around life. You're drifting. You're drifting and allowing all these other people and the circumstances of life decide where you're heading instead of you taking control. You know where you're going and making decisions that are going to help you get there, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Mhm. So, yes. And so let's say, I think a lot of men are conflict avoidant as part of that. Like they don't want to
Exactly.
make a decision because they know that making a decision that runs contrary to being a nice guy will potentially invite conflict of varying intensities, right? It could all the way up from like, hey, I don't like that, to like shaming and guilting and finger pointing and all kinds of stuff. So what do we do? How do we help men work through their fear of conflict? Because conflict is not something that Jesus was afraid of. Jesus
Yeah.
started conflict with the Pharisees openly, all throughout the Gospels, money changers, the Romans, even his own. Like the most shocking thing for me when I first started reading the Bible was to hear how often Jesus calls his own disciples like knuckleheads. Right? You guys are not like, are you really not getting this yet? Like, wake up, you know? And so Jesus was not afraid of conflict. And yet we have so many men, Christians and non Christians, who are conflict avoidant. So, what can we do to support men to standing in righteous conflict? Let's talk about that for a second. Because if you're going to make a decision, then you have to own that. Then you have to know that I'm going to land in this decision. I have made this decision. I am not going to go back on it because it is decided. Like, just real quick, the word decide comes from the Latin word cide, which means to cut. So when you decide
Mm.
something, you have cut off one possibility in favor of another. You've cut it. That's what it literally means. So when you decide something, whether you're going to left or right, to truly decide means I'm going left. And that means I can never go right. And so I'm going to land in this, even if people don't like it. How can we help men engage in more righteous conflict? Oh, in favor of the righteous decisions they make. Righteousness all across the board.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it's a difficult one. It's a big question,
Right.
you know.
Right.
Um, I I think one of the things that a lot of men lack is they don't know what their values are, right?
Mm-hmm.
They don't know what their values are. They don't know what their purpose is. They don't
Mm-hmm.
have really a feel like they have a purpose in life at all. They're just kind of doing what we said earlier, just getting the job, getting married, having kids, and then they make their wife and their family their purpose,
Mm.
which is a pretty bad idea if you
Yeah.
ask me.
Mm-hmm.
And they just because of that, like when, for example, when you make other people your purpose, right? You make your wife or your children your purpose. You're constantly trying to do everything you can to make them happy, and all your decisions revolve around that,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's why you don't make decisions. You make decisions to avoid conflict. You make decisions that aren't really to the benefit of you and your family. You don't even have a purpose and direction for your family. So I think it's establishing, like, what is your purpose in life? Like, what is your life's work? It's not just to have a 9 to 5 job that pays the bills. It's definitely not it.
Mhm.
And so many guys are stuck in that trap of just being completely unfulfilled in the work that they do. And then you have to know, what are your values? Like, okay, are you a Christian? Are you not a Christian? Are what do you subscribe to as far as your philosophy in life? What is that? And then hold true to that. If that's what you believe in it. And
Mhm.
you need to go, like, whenever you make decisions, you have to use those things knowing, like, okay, is this taking me closer to my purpose or further away from it? Like, that's a
Mhm.
really easy one right there. It's an easy question you can answer, like, every, even minute of the day as far as what you're doing,
Mhm.
right? And then, does this align with my values, my beliefs, as far as what we're going to do here? I think that, like, without those foundations, it's so difficult to make good decisions, because
Mhm.
otherwise you're just kind of doing what feels right,
Mhm.